Hey guys, tonight we are not looking up at the sky, but turning back the pages of time, gliding over cold waves and mist together, returning to ancient shores where the Vikings first set foot on unfamiliar lands with wild hearts and eyes that had never known fear. There were no maps, no compasses, only wind wood and a will that refused to stand still. They did not merely set sail. They crossed the borders of fear itself, rewriting history with oars, with legend, and with their very lives. If you are someone who cherishes stories told slowly, steeped in the echoes of time and the stillness of the soul, then before we board the ship with them, take a few seconds to subscribe to the channel, tap follow, and leave a greeting in the comments. But only if you truly feel this is a quiet little corner where you would want to return night after night. Where are you listening from? What time is it? Where you are? Leave a message in the comments. I would love to know who is stargazing with me from another corner of this world. Now then, dim the lights, turn on a gentle fan if you enjoy a soft ambient breeze, and step onto the deck with me. Listen to the wind, the scent of salt-soaked wood, and a voice from a distant century calling your name. This is not just a story about the Vikings. It is a story about us too, the ones who are still searching for a place to belong. A fragment of memory swept away by the northern wind over 1,000 years ago. A mystery about people we thought only existed in legends. Yet they once lived, once breathed, and once changed the world. Perhaps you have heard of them through the image of bearded warriors wielding axes and donning horned helmets. But no, I will tell you shortly that this detail was never real. Raiding coasts and burning villages. But that is only one side of the shield. Tonight, let us turn it over. Not to clear their name, but to understand. To understand those who lived amidst the sea breeze, the ice, and the skies lit with auroras, people who never even called themselves Vikings. They were Norsemen, the Northmen, from the lands we now know as Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. Around the late 8th century, while much of Europe remained bound by fear and theocracy, these people quietly embarked on an unexpected journey. They set sail in oakwood ships with no maps, no promises, only the wind, their survival instincts, and an unquenchable thirst for discovery. Here is something fascinating. The word Viking back then was a verb, not a title. To go Viking meant to head out to sea, perhaps to trade, perhaps to raid, or perhaps simply to seek a new place to live, to breathe, to escape the brutal winter. Do not imagine that they were all warriors. Most were farmers, blacksmiths, fishermen, goat herders, carpenters, storytellers. They built grand wooden halls, worshipped gods like Odin, the god of wisdom and war, or Thor, keeper of thunder and justice. In their minds, fate was not a game of chance, but a thread woven deliberately by the three Norns who sat at the roots of the world tree Yggdrasil. It sounds poetic, does it not? But their lives were far from easy. They endured winters so long and harsh that a single failed harvest could mean the end for an entire village. And in those moments, when they could not till the soil, they took to the sea. Not out of bloodlust, but because it was the only way to survive. Now, close your eyes. Imagine standing on a cold, fog-shrouded shore. From the distance, you hear the creak of wood under skilled hands. Through the salty mist, a ship emerges, long, narrow, with a prow curved like a dragon's claw. This is a longship, a symbol not only of war, but of freedom and aspiration. Crafted from oak, with planks layered like fish scales, the ship could bend with the waves instead of resisting them. Light, yet resilient, it could glide over the sea and slip into narrow rivers. Just 1 foot of water, about 30 centimeters, was enough for it to reach the shore. No need for a port, no need for a dock, just a strip of sand, a rocky edge, or a place the enemy would never expect. A ship could carry up to 60 people, not just with weapons, but with hoes, shovels, cooking pots, trade goods, and dreams. On its prow was often a carved dragon or serpent head meant to ward off evil spirits, and to terrify any coastal village unlucky enough to spot its sail in the distance. To the Europeans of that time, they were demons from the north, but they called themselves something warmer pathfinders. They were far from simple, not the barbarians described by medieval chronicles. They had laws of their own. They had poetry. They believed in glory after death. Mothers sent their sons to sea, not with tears, but with a blessing. Live so that when you fall, the Valkyries will choose you. That was their beginning. Before they spread fear across Europe, before they settled in Ireland or discovered the Americas, before the world even knew the name Viking, they were just people living on the edge of the world, facing nature and choosing not to bow. As dawn broke over the coast of England, a thin mist still clung to the ground, and the bells of the monastery rang out among the morning bird song. No one could have imagined that within minutes the rising sun would witness something that would shake all of Europe to its core. The year was 793, a year no one in Western European history could forget, no matter how much they wished to deny it. On the island of Lindisfarne, a sacred place of the Benedictine monks, where it was believed that only the sea wind and prayers were permitted to pass, what arrived instead was fire iron and a deathly silence. No one heard them come. Longships, serpent-like and casting shadows across the waves, approached without a sound. Their prows touched the shore like blades slicing into the flesh of holy ground. Then came the men from the north, not with screams, no slogans, no declarations, only the sound of weapons and footsteps falling upon consecrated soil. A young monk named Edric, who had been copying scripture in black ink, looked up when he heard the screams echoing from the monastery yard. He had never seen a sword, nor heard the whistle of steel slicing through flesh. And in that moment, as he rushed into the stone corridor, he saw a world unravel, books flying through fire, friends collapsing, and a stranger with ice-blue eyes staring at him as if he were no longer human, but merely a trace to be erased. They, the Vikings, did not kill for the sake of killing. They killed to survive. It was a brutal choice, but a real one. Back home, the harvest had failed. The fish had not come, and the winter was twice as long as hope. They were not seeking war. They were seeking silver wheat salt slaves, whatever could be traded for time food and another spring. One of them, named Halbjorn, paused when he seized a silver chalice. It was the first time he had seen something not made for eating or for cutting or for boasting. It was made for worship. And he thought quietly to himself, perhaps they too have gods, just like we do. The raid on Lindisfarne was not just a looting. It was an unconscious declaration: we have arrived. We exist, and the sea no longer keeps anyone out. From that point on, the inlets and coasts of England, Ireland, Scotland, and even parts of what is now France became a living map of the Norsemen. They did not merely land, they planted their feet. And the strange thing was, they did not always leave after taking what they needed. Some stayed, built camps, repaired their ships, taught their children unfamiliar words, and thus the raiding points gradually turned into settlements. In Ireland, names like Dublin and Wexford were once just seaside stops. Now they became early Viking towns. They traded exchanged goods, brewed beer, married locals. And at night, they told stories, epics carried from the north of dragons' gods and winds that ran down the spine. A warrior named Sigurd once said, "I came here for gold, but found soft soil for planting grain." Perhaps that is the greater victory. At the same time, in the north of England, the Vikings seized control and established the Danelaw, where the laws no longer belonged to Anglo-Saxon kings, but to the Norse themselves. Public assemblies called Thing were held as they were back home, where everyone young and old could speak. A form of early democracy amid an age of force. In Scotland, they took root in the Orkney and Shetland Islands, where cold stone and roaring waves made them feel as though they had never left home. To the east, the Vikings slipped along rivers like the Dvina and Dnieper, reaching the lands of the Slavic people, setting up trade outposts, and becoming the Rus, a name that would later be known as the forerunner of Russia. What is worth noting is not just how far they traveled. It is that they chose to change. They came with axes and returned with hammers to build homes, from warriors to settlers, from heathens to neighbors. And in the very places where they once set churches ablaze, their descendants would one day raise crosses. You see, history is not merely a list of battles. It is the quiet transformation of the human heart, sometimes through violence, sometimes through a shared meal, and sometimes through a simple nod between two people who once saw each other across the tips of spears. Tonight, you do not need to forgive the Vikings. Just understand, they chose to live. And in that harsh world, sometimes living was the bravest thing of all. The sea had calmed. The wind had shifted. But the human heart does not change so easily. We continue to follow in the footsteps of those who came from the north, not just on the battlefield or at the harbor, but deeper in the slow transformation of identity and belief. There was a moment not recorded in swords or maps, yet powerful enough to alter the course of history. And it began with a treaty. In the year 911, along the northern coast of what is now France, a weary Frankish king, exhausted by endless raids, did the unthinkable King Charles the Simple chose not to fight. Instead, he offered a gift, land, in exchange for peace. And the man who received this gift was a Viking chieftain named Rollo. There was no feast, no roses, only soil, black, damp, and coarse, and a calculated nod from both sides. Rollo was no longer young. He had once set churches aflame, once cut enemy ship ropes in stormy nights, once watched blood spill across beaches like tidal water. But now he saw something different, a future free from fleeing the cold, a life no longer lived by the blade. A future where his children could be born on solid ground beneath a roof with a door. That land would later be known as Normandy, the land of the Northmen. And there something miraculous occurred. Not in a single moment, but over time, the Vikings gradually became French. Imagine it in those misty valleys, Norsemen learned a new language. They married local women, brought wheat to the market, built homes not only to survive the winter, but to pass on. And in stone churches, they listened to sermons of a God who wielded no hammer, demanded no blood, and asked only for forgiveness. Some were doubtful, some grieved, some remained silent. For to abandon Odin to forsake Mjolnir was to give up a part of oneself. But in return, they found peace, identity, and a tomorrow. An old warrior named Torsten, who had never knelt before anyone, bent his knees for the first time in front of a small altar in Rouen. Not because his faith had changed, but because he did not want his grandson to ever set sail again. But do not think the Vikings lost their nature. They remained who they were. Only this time, they chose to change in order to survive. It was not surrender. It was a choice. Perhaps the hardest choice a warrior could make, to lay down the axe and pick up the blacksmith's hammer to sew instead of slay. And then we look even deeper, into belief. Unlike other peoples, the Vikings lived in a universe of symbols, legends, and destiny. They believed that fate was spun by the three Norns seated beneath the world tree Yggdrasil. Each thread was a life, long or short, glorious or grim, all preordained. At the center of that world stood Odin, the one-eyed god who sacrificed sight for wisdom. He was not all-powerful, but he craved knowledge, just like the Vikings themselves. Beside him stood Thor, the god of thunder whose hammer Mjolnir delivered justice through strength, and Freya, goddess of love and battle, who received half the souls of fallen warriors. Unlike faiths that promised peace in exchange for obedience, Norse mythology demanded that one earn their death. To fall in battle was to be chosen by the Valkyries and carried to Valhalla, the fiery hall where warriors fought forever. But to die of illness, fear, or surrender meant to be forgotten in a shadowed realm. It was a belief without mercy. But it was also their moral compass. They lived for honor, for memory, and for a seat at the world's final feast. And then, there is an image you surely have seen. A Viking warrior in a horned helmet. Apologies. That never existed. Not a single horned helmet has been found in archaeology. Not in contemporary art. Not in the writings of those who faced them. The horned helmet is a product of 19th century theater and legend. A dramatic image created by modern minds to inspire awe, fear, and sell tickets. The truth was different. Viking helmets were simple, round, sturdy, and unadorned. Because on the battlefield, horns were foolish. They snagged, they invited the blade, they got one killed. Vikings did not need horns to be terrifying. They had the silence before a storm, the eyes of those who had lived through ice and refused to bend. And so the warriors of wind and frost, who once sowed terror across Europe, began to merge into history through the very softness they once disdained. Because sometimes what allows a people to endure is not their strength, but their ability to change without losing their soul. You now see more clearly the true face of the Vikings. Not merely swords and smoke, but belief, choice, and humanity. The Vikings never knew they were writing history. They only knew that their homeland had grown too small to hold their dreams, too cold to keep its hot-blooded sons forever. So they left. They ventured farther than anyone of their time dared to go. After landing on the shores of England, Ireland, and France, they turned the prows of their ships toward a direction few dared name, westward into the fog that hung like a phantom net where the sun set, and no one could say for sure whether it would rise again. But to the Vikings, the sea was not a border. It was a road. The longship, the iconic vessel of the Viking people, was no longer merely a weapon of war. It became a symbol of freedom. Light, agile, capable of riding fierce waves or gliding quietly through narrow rivers. The men who once held wooden rudders began trading their warrior helmets for leather caps, and their baggage now carried seeds, tools, and books, no longer just axes and shields. In Iceland, they found a land harsh yet pure. Volcanoes, hot springs, cold meadows, and skies so vast they seemed to press upon the soul. They built homes, sowed barley, and above all, they wrote. The first sagas were penned by hand under candlelight, tales of gods, of men, of mistakes, to remember, to remind, to endure. But there were some who did not stop. One of them was Eric the Red, a man exiled from Iceland for killing, who instead of fleeing, looked at the map as if it were a door. He sailed north across seas filled with ice and winds howling like demons, and touched a land so cold and barren it seemed to belong to no one. Eric named it Greenland, a beautiful lie to persuade others to follow him to a place where green grass was merely a promise. And they followed him, because in the Viking mind, a name was also a kind of destiny. Yet the greatest journey did not belong to Eric. It belonged to his son, Leif Erikson. Around the year 1000, Leif looked west and asked himself, what if something lies out there? Not rumor, but forests, fresh water, a place where Vikings could live without needing to kill to survive. He set sail with a small crew, and after days of battling the sea, they reached a strange land, covered in trees, wild grapes, and fertile soil. The Norse called it Vinland, the land of vines. Today, we believe it to be Newfoundland, Canada. Leif and his people built a small settlement now known as L'Anse aux Meadows, the first European footprint in the Americas nearly 5 centuries before Columbus. But not all dreams endure. Harsh climate conflict with native peoples and the great distance made it impossible to hold Vinland. They withdrew, not in failure, but in wisdom, for they understood that some dreams are meant only to be touched, not to be possessed. Leif returned. He claimed no empire, declared no dominion. He simply said, "There is such a place." And that was enough for the sagas to forever remember his name as the Viking who reached the edge of the world. Here we see the Vikings in a different light, not as shadows spreading fear, but as fathers redrawing maps for their children, as exiles writing epic tales. They no longer sailed for plunder. They sailed with the belief that the world was always a little wider than the map in their hands. And the surprising truth is, we are not so different from them. We too leave behind what is familiar to face the unknown. We too redraw the borders of our lives with bare hands. We too wrestle between what we have and what might be. The Vikings were simply a clearer reflection of ourselves. People who always felt that the sea was whispering something just beyond the horizon, if only we had the courage to listen. So when you lie still in a dark room listening to the wind at your window, remember, there were once people just like you. They too looked out into the night and thought, maybe I should go. And they went, not for glory, but because their souls refused to remain still. They were the Vikings, and the sea was only where they began. There is a moment at sea when the wind falls still, the waves lie quiet, and all you can hear is the creak of timber beneath your feet and the sound of your own breath. A moment that feels as though time itself is holding its breath. And for the Vikings, the 11th century was just such a moment. An entire age was slipping into silence, but in that final breath, there were still heartbeats, still choices, still a farewell not fully spoken. They had traveled far, to Vinland, to the riverbanks of Rus, to the stone walls of Constantinople. They had lived, and they had changed. But time, like every river, began to twist and turn. Beyond them, the world was changing. The Christian kingdoms grew stronger, raising stone castles, building walls, forging laws and borders. The places that once lay defenseless now knew how to protect themselves. And the Vikings, those who had once ruled the seas, began to feel the wind shift. No longer was it the age of surprise. No longer the time to glide up a river and vanish before sunrise. Now the Vikings had to choose. Continue to fight against a world that had no place for them, or change in order to survive. A man named Bjorn, who had crossed the sea to Frankish lands 3 times, stood before a cross during a baptismal ceremony. He did not understand the Latin words, nor did he believe that cold water could wash away a warrior's deeds. But he understood one thing. His son would not need to carry an axe to earn respect. He could learn to read. He could own land. He might live beyond the age of 30. As ancient beliefs gave way to the cross, not everyone accepted the change. Some quietly kept Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, beneath their cloaks like a charm. Some mothers still whispered the names of the Norns while delivering children, even though their sons would be given Christian names. This was not betrayal. It was the turning season of the soul, where the old had not yet died, and the new had not yet settled. Back home, Viking villages grew more orderly, but emptier. The Thing assemblies, once places where every voice was heard, were replaced by royal decrees. Chieftains, once free men, now bowed before the kings of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. Words like tax law and king, once foreign to the Viking tongue, now entered every meal, every conversation. And thus, the era of wild freedom came to a close. But if we must name a single day to mark its end, it is the year 1066. The last Viking king with a dream of conquering England, Harold Hardrada, sailed south with a mighty fleet hoping to reclaim a throne he believed was stolen. He had been a warrior, a poet, a survivor of Constantinople and Kiev, but at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, he fell. An arrow pierced his neck. Death came like thunder at the end of the season. Just weeks later, another Viking descendant, William of Normandy, landed in England. But he did not come as a raider. He came as a monarch bearing a crown and a cross. William I at Hastings claimed the kingdom, not with longships and axes, but with strategy rule and Christian faith. The Viking Age had ended, within the very circle they themselves had drawn. And yet, strangely, when the Vikings stopped conquering, they did not vanish. They lived on in village names and languages, even in the days of the week. Tuesday, Tyr's Day, the god of war. Wednesday, Odin. Thursday, Thor. Friday, Freya. They live on in cities like Dublin, once a pirate camp, now a capital. They live on in modern English words like sky window knife and berserk, gifts from those who once terrified Europe. And they live. In the question asked by every modern soul, should we walk the old path or embrace change to survive? A Viking named Einar, near the end of his life, once told his grandchildren, "We once crossed the sea for gold. Now we cross ourselves to keep the flame alive." And that is the truth. For there is a flame, though no longer roaring, still smoldering in the ashes, the fire of longing, of memory of a people who refused to stand still. Tonight, you do not need the ocean wind to hear the past. Just be silent for a moment, and you may realize perhaps you too are standing in a moment like theirs, a moment when you must choose between the familiar and the unknown. And if you feel something stirring within you, then perhaps you too have a little Viking in your blood. The Vikings, they have long since departed. The oars no longer churn the water. The dragon's sails now hang quietly in museums. No more the clash of axes on shields, no more footprints on the northern shores. Their age has come to a close. And yet, something remains. Not empires, for they never built an empire like Rome or Babylon. Not palaces, for they lived by timber, not by stone. And certainly not proud inscriptions, for they carved memory through voice, through legend, through the blood that runs in veins. So, what did they leave behind? It is the spirit unafraid to cross the horizon. It is the courage to live fully in a world that promised nothing. It is the will to change when needed, without ever losing the core within. From farmers on the fjords, they became warriors. From warriors, traders. Then storytellers, fathers, elders. And no matter how many times the winds changed in their lives, one thing remained. They never sat still, waiting for fate to knock on their door. Tonight, if you find yourself standing at a threshold, between the known and the unknown, between staying and moving forward, remember this. The Vikings once stood there too. They were not heroes. They were simply human with calloused hands and hearts that never stopped asking, what lies beyond? And perhaps their greatest lesson is not found in glory, but in the silence after each journey. When the sails are lowered, when the flames fade, when only the wind moves through memory, what remains is this, that we truly lived, dared to live, and gave everything we had. The tale of the Vikings has drawn to a close. But if your heart still stirs when the waves crash, when your gaze drifts toward the horizon, then perhaps it never really ended. Tonight, as the world outside slows down, let me share with you a secret that has slumbered between mist and mountain stone for centuries. A place untouched by the sound of engines, unlit by artificial lights, where only the wind whispers along the edges of the rocks and distant footsteps echo. So distant, as if returning from an era long forgotten. There lies a city in a place where the sky feels so close, it seems you could touch the stars if you only reached out. No ancient map marks its location with certainty. No epic recounts its name in full. And yet, it is known to the world as Machu Picchu, the lost city of the Inca. Rising more than 700-800 feet above sea level, or about 200-400 meters, nestled among moss-covered and mist-shrouded ridges of the Andes, Machu Picchu does not appear like a ruin, but rather like a miracle preserved in time. No one can quite explain it. How could a civilization without wheels, without iron tools, have built such a magnificent city of stone? And more curiously, why did they retreat in silence, leaving everything behind for the wind and moss to claim? Long before explorers ever set foot here, the local Quechua people whispered tales of a sacred place hidden deep in the mountains, a place where the sun came to rest each day, where people did not merely live, but lived in reverence for the harmony between heaven and earth. And when you stand in the heart of that city, there is no golden dome, no lavishly carved walls, only silent stones fitted together so tightly that not even a thin sheet of paper could slide between them. No mortar, no artificial binding, only the technique and intuition of a civilization that understood stone as if it were the pulse of their own hearts. Do you hear it? If you remain still for just a moment, you will feel the echo of rituals once held here. The sound of drums beating in rhythm with the sun rising to its peak, the rustle of robes brushing against stone as priests bowed toward Inti, the sun god believed to be the father of all life. Small temples align along the east-west axis, welcoming the first light of dawn through their stone-framed windows during the summer solstice. Machu Picchu was not built to dominate, but to connect, to link people to the land, to unite soul with cosmos. The Inca were not simply builders. They were artisans of the sacred breathing, their philosophy into every terrace, every pathway, every stone etched with the imprint of the sun. When night falls, imagine yourself walking one of the ancient trails where stone has been worn smooth by the footsteps of generations. Beneath you lie terraces that once fed thousands of Inca citizens, not merely tools of agriculture, but living sculptures of the earth, where geometry, astronomy, and irrigation fused into one. The structures here did more than serve material needs. They were like stone annotations telling you how the Inca read the sky, listened to the murmurs of underground streams, and charted their world according to the journeys of stars. Some researchers even believe the entire city is a vast map, not for navigation, but for guiding harmony between mankind and the cosmos. And then, as if carried away by the wind, these people left Machu Picchu. No one knows why. No signs of destruction. No traces of haste. The city seems to have folded itself away, gently vanishing from official history, leaving behind a letter with no sender, no address, only a whisper carved into every grain of stone. Listen, everything has a rhythm, and that is only the beginning. We have not yet spoken of the stone pillars that tie the sun. We have not yet traced the strange journey that led to its rediscovery in 1911, and we are far from touching the deeper secrets beneath the ground within the shadows, or perhaps within the minds of those who once lived here. But do not worry, the night is still young, and Machu Picchu still has much to tell. Imagine you are an Inca living more than 500 years ago. There is no paper, no blueprints, no clocks. But you know how to read the sky. You know the earth will speak to you if you know how to place your hand upon it and wait. And you believe that every stone has a soul. On a misty morning, atop a mountain so high that even the birds hesitate, the stone workers begin their task. There is no clamor of iron hammers, only the sound of stone meeting stone, and the slow, steady rhythm of breath. They are performing what we today would call ashlar masonry, the technique of fitting stones together without mortar. But to them, it is not a technique. It is a ritual. Each block finds its rightful place, as if summoned there from the depths of the earth. And when two stones are set side by side, not even a strand of hair can pass between them. Yet something invisible lies in that seem reverence. Do not fight the stone, a master once said. Let it tell you what shape it wants to take. In the Inca world, there was no concept of conquering nature. There was only transformation and symbiosis. They did not flatten mountains. They embraced them, carved into them, and breathed with them. The terraces wind along the slopes not only for cultivation, but to hold the earth to guide the water and to preserve life, where otherwise there would be only rock and cloud. Each layer was designed like a breath in a cycle, where sunlight arrived at just the right moment. Water was retained in just the right place, and the climate was balanced as if by an invisible hand. And then there was geometry, not the kind drawn with rulers and compasses, but sacred geometry, where every straight line pointed to a path, and every right angle was a message from the gods. At the heart of that architecture stood the Intihuatana, the hitching post of the sun. A solitary stone, yet never alone. It was not merely a device to measure time. It was the axis between human beings and the cosmos. On the winter solstice, the shadow of the sun touched its edge like an ancient kiss promised since the dawn of the universe. You might call it superstition. But if you had lived in a place where a single rainfall or its absence meant a year of hunger, if you had looked into the night sky searching for signs of when to sow and how to survive, you would understand astronomy was not just science, it was survival. It was belief. It was an aesthetic of necessity. The structures at Machu Picchu were never placed at random. They were aligned with the cardinal directions, with the paths of stars, and with the turning of seasons. Temples, dwellings, plazas, each was a link in a cosmic mechanism that the Inca built in silence without ever writing down a single explanation. And perhaps the most beautiful truth is this: no one claimed authorship over those structures. No emperor etched his name into stone. No one called himself the chief architect, because for them these buildings were not meant to glorify a man, but to honor a way of life, a philosophy of existence that humans are part of the universe, not above it, not beneath it. You see, in an age where we build cities to rise above the sky to separate ourselves from nature, Machu Picchu whispers something else. Be within nature. Be with it, not over it. That is not a message meant only for the past. It is a truth each of us needs to hear again, especially now when cities grow ever louder, when stars disappear from our skies, and when our hearts drift farther and farther from the earth. Sometimes the strongest way to survive is to disappear. We return to Machu Picchu, not to admire it once more, but to touch upon a question that still has no answer. Why would such a perfect city be left behind? It was not destroyed. There was no blood, no fire, no fallen fortresses, only absence. So stark, it chills the bones. Imagine you are an Inca priest, a keeper of rituals in the Temple of the Sun, perched high atop the mountain. Every dawn, you welcome the first light passing through the stone window and bow before the god Inti, not out of fear, but gratitude. You have spent your life between astronomy and spirit, among stones that know their direction and trails that lead into silence. Then, one day, a dreadful message arrives from the East invaders bearing fire disease, and unfamiliar doctrines have crossed the mountains, ravaging Cusco, the sacred heart of the empire. They do not understand the language of the sun. They seek gold, but cannot grasp the value of midday shade. And you understand, Machu Picchu must not be defiled, not because it is strong, but because it is sacred. It was never built for defense, but to exist as a whisper between earth and sky. So, in the still of night, you gather the last few who remain. No panic, no tears, only a sacred silence, as if the entire city is bowing to a truth it cannot change. We must leave, so this place may live. Some believe Machu Picchu was abandoned as a strategic decision to remain hidden, untouched, and untainted by the hands of conquest. Others believe nature reclaimed it. Landslides, shifting waters, and the harsh altitude made life here too difficult to sustain. And perhaps, when the empire's seat of power moved elsewhere, Machu Picchu slowly lost its sacred relevance, fading into obscurity like a letter never sent. But in every theory, one truth remains unshaken. Their departure was not rushed. Everything stayed intact. The stairways unscarred by iron boots, the walls unburned by wrath. Machu Picchu did not fall. It simply chose silence. And perhaps that choice is not so foreign to us today. In a world of endless noise, social media, constant headlines, and unanswered messages, sometimes we too long to step away from it all to preserve something pure, untouched, undefined. Machu Picchu did just that, not out of weakness, but to protect the most sacred thing, stillness. For only in silence can one truly hear their own voice. And only when a city learns to be silent can it become eternal memory. If you stand in the temple of the sun at dawn, you will see the sunlight pierce through the stone opening and strike precisely the slab where offerings were once laid. That is no accident. It is the result of centuries of observation, of learning, of reverence for the cosmos, each stone placed in harmony with the heartbeat of the sky. There, the Inca did not simply pray. They spoke to the sun as children calling home. They did not beg for harvest. They only said, "We are still listening." And then they left. No one knows how many walked away that night. No one knows where they went. Only the wind knows. Only the stone remembers. And you, the one who is listening now, are also a keeper of that memory. We will follow those silent footsteps. We will open doors that have been closed for centuries to see what life once looked like behind those stone walls, where the laughter of children, the scent of toasted corn cakes, and the rhythm of looms still linger hidden in the mist. Because a city may leave its people, but memory never abandons those who dare to listen. Under the silvery gray light of the Andes dusk, Machu Picchu does not rise like a mythical kingdom, but rather appears as a village where the sacred and the ordinary live together beneath one shared sky. There is no separation between places of prayer and places of cooking. No clear boundary between temple and terrace. Every stone here holds a story, and every person who once lived here walked as though in daily dialogue with the cosmos. Imagine a morning in the 15th century. An Inca girl, her hair braided with wool dyed the color of clay, sits on the stone steps outside her home. Her mother works at the loom beside her hands, rising and falling in rhythm, like the heartbeat of the whole city. Nearby, her father has already gone to the terraces before the sun even crested the peaks, where maize, potatoes, and quinoa greet the first drops of dew. In Machu Picchu, every motion of life carried the essence of ritual. When the mother wove cloth, it was not merely for wearing, but for offering. Every pattern, every thread was a symbol: the sun, the river, or the sacred mountain. When the farmer sowed seeds, he was not just tilling the earth, he was returning part of his soul to Pachamama, the earth goddess. And when the festival of the sun Inti Raymi was held from small stone platforms perched along the mountain slope, you would hear chants rising like smoke songs for the harvest from a united community echoing among the beat of deep drums, the whisper of ceremonial robes against stone, and the steady footsteps moving toward the dawn. You see, Machu Picchu has no cathedral, but every corner of it is sacred. A passageway between two rock walls is so perfectly built that sunlight enters only on the spring equinox. A small altar aligns directly with the Southern Cross, like a message sent skyward. This space was not designed for grandeur, but for transformation from the mundane to the divine, from the fleeting to the eternal. The stone-paved paths do not lead you to a market or an administrative center. They lead you to yourself. Because as you ascend each step, each one crafted to fit the natural stride, you leave behind the noise of words and draw closer to silence. And in that silence, something strange happens. You feel heard. But Machu Picchu was not just a place for prayer. It was a living city. The Inca did not build it to be admired, but to be inhabited, to work, to love, to grieve, to survive. The small stone homes, roofed with thatched grass, though not luxurious, were well ventilated, sun-warmed, and insulated by the very breath of the earth. Communal kitchens where women baked together, shared stories, and taught their children sat beside temples, not far from palaces. Everyone ate together, dreamed together, believed together. No social class divided soul from sustenance. And then there was water, the lifeblood of it all. The irrigation system of Machu Picchu was not just an engineering feat, but an act of reverence. Tiny stone channels brought water from mountain springs, weaving like silver threads through the entire city, through temples and livestock pens alike. The water was not blocked, not forced. It was invited, guided, and respected as a sacred guest. Behind this serenity lay a constant challenge to live within nature, not to dominate it. To create beauty, but not let that beauty become prideful. To believe in the gods, but still dig the earth, carry water, weave cloth, and raise children. Can we modern people understand that paradox? When we long to reconnect with nature, yet fear discomfort. When we yearn for stillness, but are addicted to the rush, the Inca did not reject that contradiction. They embraced it and lived within it. That is why Machu Picchu still stands not as a museum, but as a silent mirror. Have you ever stepped into an empty room and suddenly felt your heart sink from the weight of what is not there? There is no one inside, but something remains. A melody not yet gone, a breath that just left, a memory that does not belong to you, yet still brings tears to your eyes. Machu Picchu is like that, a city that once lived, then disappeared, but never truly died. At dawn, atop the Andes, the clouds drift at eye level like silent silver ribbons. The stone paths remain untouched. The steps leading to the Temple of the Sun still stand firm as if they had never been abandoned. Yet everything is hauntingly quiet. No human voices, no roosters crowing, no children laughing, no sound of weaving echoing across the slopes. Only wind and stone, and a feeling beyond words, as if this place once knew love, knew sorrow, knew hope, and then chose to retreat not out of defeat, but to preserve something sacred. No one knows exactly when Machu Picchu was left behind. No records, no farewell. And yet somehow everything remains. The homes, the hearths, the small temples. As if with one wisp of smoke, one voice rising from behind a stone wall, the city would awaken whole as though it had never been forgotten. Some say the Inca left Machu Picchu to protect it from the Spanish. When Cusco fell, when other sacred temples were plundered and turned into fortresses or cathedrals, perhaps someone within the royal court decided to hide this city in the mist, using only silence. No trails marked, no names spoken. As if erasing it from memory was the way to let it survive. Others believe it was nature that pushed the people away. Earthquakes, landslides, or quiet but fierce shifts in climate. And some offer a simpler theory. The Inca Empire moved in another direction. New centers of power emerged. And Machu Picchu, though beautiful, was no longer at the heart of faith and governance. Whatever the reason, the departure feels more like a sacred rite than a loss. There are no signs of flight, no ruins, only a deep reverence for something greater than life itself, a message carved in stone sealed for the future. Remember what we said at the beginning of this story, how the city felt as though it had been shaped by the hand of nature. Now it seems that nature has also reached back to touch it, draping it with a soft veil to protect it, to keep it warm, to let it sleep. And Machu Picchu truly slept. For centuries, undiscovered, unrecorded on any map, known only to the local people who kept its location like a sacred vow. A city that had once been the soul of an empire became a dream hovering among the high mountains. Until one day in 1911, an American man, Hiram Bingham, stepped into the Peruvian jungle carrying not only maps, but a sense of intuition and a belief in legends. He was not searching for gold. He was searching for a story. He listened to the whispers of the Quechua locals about a city in the sky, a place where the sun never lost its way, a place no one dared to touch for too long. And then, after hours of climbing ridges, crossing streams, pushing through thickets, and following the trails left by llama caravans, he saw it, not as a discovery, but as a reunion between two worlds, between the past and the present. Machu Picchu did not erupt in joy at being found. It simply opened its eyes, quietly watching modern man, waiting to see what he would do with a legacy preserved through both silence and love. You see, some things do not need to be spoken daily to remain real. Some values must vanish in order to be truly seen. And some cities like Machu Picchu are never truly forgotten. They are simply waiting for you to stop, to breathe, and to listen. In 1911, an American man, Hiram Bingham, set foot in the dense mountainous jungle above the Urubamba Valley. He was not a formal archaeologist nor a scholar with stacks of ancient maps. He carried only intuition, a belief in legends, and something else, something even he might not have been able to name. And then he saw it. Not under a spotlight. There was no applause, no banner to greet him, just a city of stone standing in silence as if it had never truly been absent, only waiting for the right person to knock. Bingham did not discover Machu Picchu, he reunited with it. And the world, roused from its long slumber, began to awaken too. Photographs were taken. Maps were redrawn. Articles appeared in the New York Times. And suddenly, all of humanity turned its gaze toward a place the world had forgotten, a city not built to dominate, but to understand. Researchers arrived in waves. Drones, satellites, 3D models. The irrigation system was decoded. Astronomical axes aligned ancient agricultural patterns reconstructed. Yet amid all the data and analysis, one thing could not be measured. Why, after all these centuries, does this city still leave us speechless? Not because of the stones, not because of the architecture, but because it lives, and it still watches us. You see, Machu Picchu is not just a source of pride for the people of Peru. It is a mirror reflecting all that we have forgotten in our rapid march toward civilization. The Inca did not build skyscrapers. They shaped stones to fit in their hands. They did not cut through forests, they curved with them. They did not escape nature to survive. They lived within it in a way that never asked nature to leave them. In a world like ours, where climate storms, urban noise, and loneliness in crowds leave many Americans feeling lost, this city of stone sends us a message. Gentle, but impossible to ignore. That progress does not mean abandoning memory. That sustainability is not a trendy idea. It is a way of life that once was deeply real. That connection does not require Wi-Fi but presence, full presence, the kind that once stood beneath the sun and whispered, "Thank you." Today, millions visit Machu Picchu every year. They come from every nation, every faith, every background, not just to check in, but to rediscover a feeling that has nearly vanished, the feeling of being small before something far greater than ourselves. Machu Picchu does not teach us how to build cities. It teaches us how to listen to the places where we live, not only with our ears, but with our hearts, with the silence that follows every question. And when you leave that place, step down the ancient stairs and glance back one last time through the drifting mist, you will see. Machu Picchu does not try to hold you. It simply smiles like a keeper of ancient dreams, knowing that as you return to your own city, you will carry something with you. Not a souvenir, not the perfect photograph, but a question that still echoes quietly inside you. Am I living close to what is most sacred in my life? Or have I drifted from it? And perhaps it is that very question, not the answer, that is the greatest gift history can offer the present. We have just traveled through a story, but perhaps it is still being written, not in the Andes, but somewhere near you, on the balcony where you sit, in the way you slow your step on a crowded street, or on a night like this when together we grow quiet just enough to hear old stones speak. Sleep well. And if you dream, may you dream of a city that never truly vanished, only waited for you to enter with a heart quiet enough to remember the sacred things we once knew. When everything has quieted down, and only the soft rustling of the wind outside the window remains. Imagine yourself sitting under the gentle glow of a warm yellow light, wrapped in a soft blanket, listening to a story, not about glory or triumph, but about a child born with the name of someone who had already passed away. A life that began with a gravestone bearing their very own name. Have you ever heard of someone born to take the place of a shadow? Not an ordinary shadow, but that of a child who had once been born named buried and then quietly vanished from the world. 1 year later, on that same day, another child was born, and his parents, whether moved by faith, sorrow, or a quiet stubbornness, gave him the exact same name as the child they had lost, Vincent. The year was 1853 in the village of Zundert, a small village in the southern Netherlands, where the open fields stretched like dreams, and the sky was forever veiled in a pale gray mist. In the village church right by the entrance stood a stone marker bearing the name Vincent van Gogh, the same birth date, only a different year. And the newborn boy who was given that very same name grew up with that gravestone like an invisible older brother who had always gone one step ahead, into death. You might be wondering, how could something like that affect a child? Imagine playing in a garden, then suddenly seeing your own name carved into cold stone, or walking into church every week passing by yourself just a version that would never grow up. That feeling, though never spoken aloud, quietly crept into every corner of Vincent's childhood. He was the second-born child, but was raised as the first. He was the living one, yet he carried the name of the dead. The Van Gogh family was a strict Christian household. His father, Theodorus, was a minister of the Calvinist faith. His mother, Anna Cornelia, was a woman who loved nature and had once painted flowers in her youth. They had 6 children, but Vincent was always the quietest of them all. He was not like other children, often silent. He would sit for hours watching clouds drift by or walk miles just to observe a bush as it changed with the seasons. He did not enjoy school. Though intelligent and with a good memory, Vincent could not seem to fit in. The lessons felt too dry. The other children too loud. Teachers found him difficult to teach, and classmates called him strange. But Vincent did not rebel. He simply withdrew, quietly observing, quietly remembering. He began writing letters very early, before he even knew he would one day be a painter. His first letters were sent to his younger brother Theo, the one person who would become the final thread connecting Vincent to the world. And if there was any place where he could feel at peace, it was in nature. Vincent would walk under the misty trees, watch the sky shift in color, and listen to the wind sweeping across the fields, not with his ears, but with his soul. In nature, he was not the replacement. He did not need to speak. He only needed to see and to feel. At night, when everyone else was fast asleep, Vincent would often stand by the window. The sky was pitch black, but sometimes glittered with stars, as if someone far away was whispering something to him. He may not have understood it yet, but one thing was certain from a very early age. Vincent sensed that he did not belong to this world in the ordinary way. As if he were just passing through a silent guest, remembering and preparing to tell his story in a language no one was yet ready to hear. A painter. Not yet. Vincent had not drawn anything at that point. No colors, no brushes. but the seeds were already in the ground. The way he saw the world, not with his eyes, but with his emotions, was already a beginning. What Vincent sought was not fame, but truth. A quiet, sorrowful truth, one so beautiful it could break your heart. But the path toward that truth was still long and very dark. In the years to come, Vincent would fall. He would fall many times. Into unrequited love, into religion, into disappointment, into poverty. But it was from those very falls that he would find color. And no one, not even he himself, could have imagined that what seemed like fragments within him would one day become the very material for paintings that would leave all of humanity in silence. Have you ever heard the wind passing over the fields of Zundert? That is no ordinary wind. It is the whisper of a soul just beginning to tremble gently, like a sorrowful melody you cannot stop listening to. That is Vincent van Gogh, and this is only the beginning. There are places on the map that no one pays attention to. Faint points, silent and still like lands forgotten by the world. Borinage in the south of Belgium is one of those places, a region of coal mines thick with soot, where men hunch in the dark and children grow up on dry coughs and empty stomachs. And that was where a lost Dutchman came not to paint, but to be forgiven. Vincent van Gogh was 27 years old at the time. His soul was restless, and the dream of religion had already crumbled on a classroom bench after he failed the theology exam. He had once hoped to become a pastor, not to preach, but to serve. But the church told him he was too emotional, too zealous. To Vincent, that sounded no different than being told you love too much. In Borinage, he began to live as he believed Christ once had in poverty, in patience, and in quiet companionship with the suffering. He slept on the floor, gave away all his clothes, and shared his last piece of bread with the miners. People would see a gaunt preacher in ragged clothes, hair tangled barefoot in the snow. He did not deliver sermons. He simply listened. He offered no blessings, only held the hands of the dying. But the church did not approve. Too extreme, they said. And so Vincent was dismissed. No church, no money, no title. He survived on scraps of bread, on the kindness of people even poorer than he was. But it was in those darkest of days that a sliver of light began to shine in his heart, not from above, but from deep in the earth, where men swung picks and hauled coal eyes red and hands cracked from the cold. He began to draw. No technique, no training, just rough sketches in charcoal and old pencil. He drew them, the ones no one wanted to see. A woman holding a child in a room without windows. A man gasping for breath on the floor. A group of miners gathered around an oil lamp, their hands rough as tree bark. He did not try to make them beautiful. He tried to make them real. No one paid him for his drawings. But to Vincent, it was not about art. It was the only way not to disappear. If I cannot save them through prayer, he once whispered in a letter, then I will try to preserve them in lines. And then, like someone crossing a threshold from which there is no return, Vincent made a decision that the world would one day remember. He would become a painter. Not for glory, not for fame. He had no illusions of either. To him, painting was not a choice. It was a lifeline. It was life itself. From that moment on, Vincent immersed himself in the study of painting as if he were learning to survive. No school, no teacher, only old books, reproductions of classical works, and a pair of eyes that saw the world through sorrow. He studied anatomy to draw hands gripping tools, studied perspective to capture the quiet light falling through a window. He did not paint to beautify. He painted to bear witness with brush, with color, with compassion buried deep in his chest. His earliest works, like The Potato Eaters, were proof of that. A family huddled around a plain wooden table, gaunt faces, hands like knotted roots dipping into boiled potatoes. The oil lamp cast just enough light to reveal every wrinkle. No laughter, no celebration, only silence. A silence Vincent painted better than anyone. The critics were not impressed. They called his work crude, dark, not art. But to Vincent, it was the truth. And he wrote, "I do not paint to please others. I paint so that someone might see and say this person felt deeply." Though he painted day and night, Vincent remained poor. He drifted from town to town, living on the steady and quiet support of Theo, his brother, the one person who never left him. At times, Vincent survived on stale bread, wearing the same coat through the entire winter. He fell ill. He burned with fever. He became exhausted. But the more his body weakened, the clearer his artistic voice became. He learned to speak through the brown of soil, the gray of smoke, and the black of shadow. He learned to paint with the silence of the poor and the gaze of the forgotten. And so, in the darkness of Borinage, something extraordinary happened. Not a preacher was born, but a painter of compassion. Vincent van Gogh did not yet have an audience, but he had found something far more important than a spotlight, a reason to keep living. And then, in the silence, the wind changed. Other doors waited for him in Paris, in the south of France, and in a little yellow house. But that is the story of another night. For now, let Vincent, the boy with the sorrowful eyes and calloused hands, sit for a moment in your heart, quietly, in the way he had always been, not to draw your attention, but to make you feel, through color, through truth, and through love, even when the world did not return it. Paris. The year was 1886. This city was not merely the capital of France, but the heart of an artistic dream. Smoke-filled cafes, cobblestone streets, echoing with footsteps and flower-laced balconies that seemed to exhale light. But to Vincent van Gogh, Paris was not just a place, it was a test. After years spent in darkness, after the frozen loneliness of Borinage and winters without a stove, Vincent stepped into Paris like a man learning to breathe again. His younger brother Theo was by then a respected art dealer, living in a small apartment cramped and always short of air. But to Vincent, it was a temporary heaven. He set down his bag, looked out the window, and saw Paris shimmering in the afternoon sun. But it was not sunlight as he had known it. Here the light did not merely strike objects. It struck the way people felt the world. And that overwhelmed him. For the first time in his life, Vincent realized that a painting did not need to be dark to be honest. He saw the works of the Impressionists, flecks of color that seemed to quiver on canvas. The scenes were not sharply defined, yet they pulsed with emotion. He encountered the paintings of Pissarro, Monet, Degas, and names that had never appeared in the worn art books he once studied. There were no rigid compositions, no strict color theories like in the Netherlands. Here, painting was a conversation with light. And Vincent, the man who once painted only in browns, blacks, and ash gray, felt as if a blindfold had been lifted. He began to paint again, no longer only peasants and shadows. Now it was the shattered light on the River Seine rooftops, blazing red beneath the sunset boisterous taverns, and most notably himself. Vincent painted dozens of self-portraits. In each his face was different, sometimes staring directly skeptical, and other times lost somewhere in the blur of shadows. They were not beautiful. They did not pose. They were shards of a broken mirror he held up to his own face, hoping to find someone behind the skin, the hair, and the perpetually damp eyes. Yet despite the city's brilliance, Vincent remained. Vincent, a man who never quite belonged anywhere. At gatherings of artists, he would either remain silent or speak too much. He listened with passion, but his gaze always seemed distant, as if holding a private conversation with something inside himself. Some thought him strange. Some felt pity. But most kept their distance. He was a painting not yet dry, easy to crack, easy to bruise. Then he met Paul Gauguin, another rebellious painter, though in a completely different way. Gauguin was bold, confident, filled with the spirit of distant lands and decisions made without regret. Vincent admired him. Perhaps deep down he longed for that kind of certainty. A friend, someone who understood, someone who would stay. But Paris was too cramped, too loud, too frantic. Vincent grew tired. He suffered headaches, insomnia, eyes weary from color, heart aching with loneliness. He knew that if he remained here, he would be swallowed whole, not by others, but by things within himself that he had not yet come to understand. So he left. At the start of 1888, Vincent boarded a night train heading south to a place called Arles, a tiny town in the region of Provence. There he dreamed a different dream, a place to live, to paint, and to rediscover the gentleness he had lost. In the old wooden carriage, Vincent sat quietly, his fingers drawing invisible lines on the frost-covered window. Paris faded behind him like an unfinished painting. And ahead, where the mistral winds swept fiercely across the lavender fields, lay a sky he had never yet dared to paint. Vincent did not know that this would be the place where he would reach the most radiant heights and also fall into the deepest pain of his life. But that is the story of another sunrise. For now, as you quietly close your eyes, try to imagine the sunlight of southern France streaming through a wooden window and a slender man standing before his easel whispering to himself, "This yellow, could it save me?" Because in the world of Vincent van Gogh, sometimes light is the only thing left to hold on to. Mornings in Arles often began with slanted sunlight slipping through wooden shutters, bathing the quiet room in gold. The mistral wind swept across the fields like an invisible hand brushing over rooftops, stirring fine dust from the early blooming almond blossoms. In what seemed to be the quietest corner of southern France, Vincent van Gogh began to paint with a fervor he had never known before. The small house with yellow walls, later known as the Yellow House, became the first realized dream of his life. It was not a grand mansion, nor a famous studio, but to Vincent it was a true home, a place to be himself, where colors could live, and where the heart could tremble without fear of being ridiculed. He moved in with a simple yet grand plan to create a community of Southern artists, a place where painters would live together, eat together, create together, share and nurture one another like brothers. Vincent was not just seeking artistic collaboration, he was seeking belonging. And when Paul Gauguin agreed to come to Arles in the autumn of 1888, Vincent felt as though he had touched a miracle. He hung paintings all over the house, prepared a private room for Gauguin, and placed bright sunflowers in vases as a gesture of welcome. Every golden petal was a quiet plea. Please do not leave me. But dreams, as always, refused to stay still. Gauguin arrived bringing with him a strong and eccentric presence. The two men were opposites in nearly every way. Gauguin decisive, reserved, rationale. Vincent, fragile, intense, emotional. At first, they debated passionately about color, about composition, about portraiture. But gradually, debate turned to disagreement, and disagreement to quarrel. Not because one was right and the other wrong, but because both were lonely in their own way. Inside the house with yellow walls, the air grew tense. Vincent wrote to Theo daily, recounting cold meals, long silences that hung like cracks in stone. He began to fear that Gauguin would leave, and that fear for Vincent was not merely about losing a friend, it was about losing the last barrier between him and the abyss. He tried to hold on with paintings. He painted like a man possessed. Sunflowers, wheat fields, starry nights, cypress trees, an empty bedroom, a solitary chair. Each canvas was an attempt to keep Gauguin to hold on to the illusion of an artist's family that had never truly existed. The works from that period pulsed with life, yet carried the weight of an exhausted soul. Then came the night of December 23, 1888, a breathless coda to a symphony cracking at the seams. A violent argument. Gauguin walked out. There were rumors that Vincent chased him with a razor, but no one knows for certain. What is known is this. That night, Vincent returned home alone to a house now filled only with emptiness and the sound of wind through the shutters. He went into his room, quietly, took a razor, and cut off part of his left ear. It was not just an act of self-harm. It was a storm of loneliness no one could hear. A cry for help no one answered. He wrapped the piece of ear in newspaper, brought it to a brothel, and handed it to a woman named Rachel, without a word. The next morning, Vincent was found unconscious in a pool of blood. The townspeople erupted in rumor. The newspapers called him mad. Children stared at him from a distance. And Gauguin, the one he had hoped for most, left Arles forever. Vincent was taken to the hospital. There, within white walls and torn-up dreams, he continued to paint. A self-portrait with a bandaged ear. The hospital courtyard. The red vineyard, the only painting he ever sold in his lifetime. But though he kept painting, something within Vincent had broken. Not just his ear, but the final piece of him that believed he could be loved if he simply tried hard enough. The yellow house was now only a hollow shell. Gauguin's room would never be entered again. And the light of Arles, once a symbol of new beginnings, had become too bright for a soul no longer able to withstand the fire. Do you hear it? Not the sound of a falling blade, but the voice of someone in the night whispering to himself, "Is anyone there?" And in the silence of the world, the answer never comes. Vincent van Gogh, a man who did not need fame only to be seen, was once again left behind. But the story does not end here, not in Arles, not with a severed ear, but in another place deeper still, where he would paint the night sky, not with his eyes, but with his heart. For those who suffer quietly always leave behind the most beautiful echoes. There are places where time seems to slow down. Moss-covered stone walls, long corridors echoing the clack of wooden clogs, and the faint sound of cuckoo birds calling from distant olive groves. Saint-Rémy-de-Provence. A former monastery turned asylum was the place Vincent van Gogh chose to lock himself away after the crisis in Arles. He was not forced. He was not condemned. He was simply a man who walked into the shadows by choice, hoping to preserve the last light still flickering within his heart. It was May of 1889. There, Vincent had a small room with iron bars across the window. By day, sunlight streamed through the slats, casting veins of light on the walls. By night, the sky stretched endlessly full of stars, and it was this very sky that a year later would become legend. But in that first moment, it was only silence and shallow breath. He followed the institution's scheduled medication meals walks under supervision. But whenever he was lucid enough, Vincent asked to paint. The doctors allowed it, and so he turned an empty room into a studio. As it had always been, painting remained the one thing that made him feel he had not completely vanished. He began with what was closest the tree outside his window, the solemn stretch of corridor, the wild clusters of purple thistles. Then the fields. Then the sky. But something had changed in the way he saw the world. Vincent's paintings at Saint-Rémy were not depictions. They were sensations. Trees did not simply stand. They writhed, spiraled as though enduring an invisible storm. Colors no longer followed nature. They followed emotion. Blue for longing, yellow for yearning, and swirling whites, blacks, and blues, like echoes from a mind on the verge of breaking. And then, one night, when his mind was calm enough for his hand to move, Vincent placed his easel before the barred window of his room and began sketching the sky. Not the sky you see at night, but the sky you feel when you are utterly alone in silence and your heart feels like it might explode from loneliness. The starry night was a sigh rendered in color. The stars did not rest. They moved, swirled, trembled like human hearts. The sky churned like waves. A tall black cypress rose like a prayer. And below the village slept as if the whole world were at peace and only one soul remained awake. Vincent once said he was not satisfied with that painting. He called it a failure. But the world did not agree. Not later. Not ever again. Though he painted prolifically, Vincent could not escape his mental struggles. Some days he could not remember what he had painted. Some nights he trembled, panicked, his words disjointed. Once he drank turpentine, a gesture half desperate, half plea. Yet he lived, and he kept painting. Nearly 150 paintings were completed in just 1 year at Saint-Rémy. Irises, the bedroom, olive trees, wheat field with reaper. Each canvas was a diary entry, not written in words, but in brushstrokes and a silence full of sound. And throughout it all there were still the letters to Theo, his brother, his soulmate. He wrote about brushes, about colors, about moods, never complaining, just trying to describe the indescribable, the feeling of falling apart, while still trying to make something beautiful. We live to try, he wrote, though no one promised we would succeed. In May of 1890, Vincent left the asylum. The doctors said he had improved. Though still fragile, he agreed to move to the village of Auvers-sur-Oise, a quiet place near Paris, near Theo. There, a doctor named Paul Gachet awaited a man who loved painting and understood sorrow. Vincent painted his portrait twice. In one, the doctor leans on his hand, eyes distant as if carrying the world's melancholy. Vincent noted, "He is even sadder than I am." In Auvers, Vincent worked feverishly. In 70 days, he completed more than 70 paintings. Gray skies over fields, a church tilting like a dream, rows of trees trembling before a storm. The pace was relentless, as if he knew he did not have much time. And perhaps he was right. In that moment between the blue skies of Auvers and the endless fields of wheat, Vincent van Gogh was slowly stepping into a place where sorrow no longer had a name. It was a summer day at the end of July in the year 1890 when a slender man holding a small pistol quietly walked along a dirt path leading to the wheat fields. No one paid him any attention. No one knew that he was stepping into a painting he would never complete. Vincent van Gogh had lived as a man suspended between two worlds, the harsh reality and the world of color only he could see. And now, amid the fields that stretched like oceans, he chose to end his life in the very place where he had painted, had loved, and had suffered the most. No one knows for certain what happened in those moments. Perhaps he felt he had said all he needed to through his art. Perhaps he could no longer bear the burden called existence. Or perhaps he simply longed for silence like the stars he once painted shining quietly without needing to be understood. He shot himself in the chest. He did not die immediately. He was still conscious, still able to walk back to the inn, still able to breathe long enough for Theo, his beloved younger brother, to reach his side. There were not many words exchanged. They did not need them, for true love sometimes speaks in silence. In his final breath, Vincent whispered, "Sorrow will last forever." And then he was gone. Vincent was buried on a hill where the trees grew low and the sky had no walls. A bouquet of wildflowers was placed upon his grave, and over time the grass slowly covered his name, as if nature itself wished to hold him this time forever. But that was not the end, because sometimes the most beautiful, the truest things must wait a long time to be seen. 6 months later, Theo too passed away. Illness and pain, yes, but perhaps the greatest pain was not being able to stay beside the brother he had tried to protect for a lifetime. And then, like an unexpected harmony born from tragedy, the woman standing between the two graves, Johanna Bonger, Theo's wife, quietly began a journey no one could have foreseen. She gathered Vincent's paintings, over 800 of them, most never exhibited. She read hundreds of letters, preserved every handwritten line, every hesitant punctuation mark, not to glorify a master, but to rescue a man. She did not advertise. She did not boast. She simply told the story, opened small exhibitions, published the letters, and little by little the world began to listen. One by one, people stood before Vincent's paintings, and they saw not only skies and wheat fields. They saw themselves lonely, longing to be understood, yet quietly living through beauty no one else noticed. They saw fragments of their own souls in every swirling shade of blue, in the bright yellows of sunflowers reaching up from dry earth. As the 20th century unfolded, his name became eternal. The Starry Night hangs in New York. Sunflowers rests in some of the world's most visited museums. His letters are studied in classrooms. But more importantly, the spirit of Vincent van Gogh transcended art. He became the symbol of the misunderstood, of those who feel too deeply, of the souls so sensitive the modern world labels them as wrong, and the clearest proof that success need not arrive within a lifetime in order to change the world. Now, in this quiet night, as you listen to these final words, let your heart drift back to that little village of Auvers, to where an unknown man left behind stars for generations to come. Because in truth, each of us carries a part of Vincent van Gogh. We have all felt lost in a noisy world. All wished that someone might truly see us. And though we may not hold a brush each day, we are trying to paint our lives through our actions, our feelings, our courage, even if no one applauds. And that truly is the most beautiful thing of all. Not needing fame, not needing display, only needing someone like you to still remember, still feel, still be moved, so that the stars Vincent painted have never gone out. Close your eyes if you wish, not to sleep, but to listen. Listen for a message that has no words. Be real. Feel fully, even if no one sees. The light is still there, and that is enough. Have you ever heard the tale of a child born amid the roar of thunder and the tearing blaze of lightning? Not in a novel, not in a folk tale, but in real historical records long buried under the dust of time, until tonight. Close your eyes and imagine you are in a small village nestled in the Balkan Mountains in the year 1856. The village is called Smiljan, then part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, now located in Croatia. It is late at night. The wind howls as if someone is sighing through the cracks of wooden shutters. Rain lashes the roof like the drums of war. And in a dimly lit room, glowing only by candlelight, a woman is locked in the throes of labor. A bolt of lightning strikes so close that the entire village trembles. Chaos reigns outside, but within, Mrs. Juka, Tesla, presses her lips together in silent endurance. A trembling midwife whispers, "A child born on a stormy night. It is a bad omen." Juka says nothing for a moment, then smiles, her voice light as a breath upon the candle's wick. "No, he will be a child of light." And so it was. That night, Nikola Tesla was born. No one knew it then, but a flame had just been kindled in the chronicles of humanity. Young Nikola grew up between two poles. His father, Milutin Tesla, was an Orthodox priest, stern intellectual, and devoted to logic. He dreamed his son would follow in his footsteps, preaching and writing. But his mother, Juka, though she had never attended school, possessed a genius for mechanics unmatched by anyone. She could dismantle and reassemble any household object, inventing work tools from the simplest of materials. Looms, grain grinders, even kitchen utensils, all made by hand. In the shadow of that mother, a seed silently sprouted. From early childhood, Nikola was unlike other children. He could read a book once and recite it line by line as if holding it in his hands. Images did not merely appear in his imagination, they burst into life, vivid as dreams in broad daylight. He saw gears spinning copper wires, twisting flashes of light flaring, all playing before his eyes like visions only he could touch. Yet with this imagination came strange dream-like visions. Sometimes bursts of light would flash in his mind like lightning, making it hard to tell reality from illusion. But instead of fearing them, he learned to control them. Over time, they became a refined instrument in his creative process. He could design an entire complex machine in his mind, test how it worked, and only when perfect would he begin to build it. From an early age, Nikola also showed curious obsessions. He avoided touching people's hair, could not bear the sight of pearls, and had a near mystical fixation with the number 3. Before entering a building, he had to circle it 3 times. When washing his hands, it had to be done in 3 rounds. To outsiders, these habits seemed bizarre, but to Tesla, they were the only way to keep his mind in harmony with an invisible order of the universe that he sensed so clearly. You see, while other children ran through fields, flew kites, or played by the streams, Nikola sat quietly watching migratory birds. How do they fly thousands of miles without looking at a map, he wondered. Or he would gaze at the stars and ask, why do they twinkle? Is energy from the cosmos sending us signals? It was not mere curiosity. He longed to touch the true pulse of the universe. After finishing elementary school in Karavac, Tesla attended the Austrian Polytechnic in Graz, a place alive with the clash of metal and the hum of electricity from generators. There, during what seemed like an ordinary class, he witnessed a motor powered by direct current, or DC, the dominant technology of the time. But Tesla, the wiry student, whose eyes always seemed to peer into the void, saw something else. Direct current flowed in only one direction. To him, it was dull, limited. In his mind, an idea sparked: why not create a current that oscillates, a form of energy that moves forward, then back, like the breath of the universe? Thus, the concept of alternating current, or AC, began to form in his mind, quietly at first, then ever more clearly. No one understood. No one believed. But that did not matter. Tesla did not need others' belief. He needed time. He needed long, solitary nights with the wind and the dark to listen to what the world had not yet dared to imagine. And do you know what the strangest part is? More than a century later, we live within the very dream that boy envisioned in the middle of a storm. Not everyone born amid lightning carries light with them, but Nikola Tesla did. And perhaps that light still hums softly in the night, waiting for you to listen. New York, in the year 1884, was unlike any other place on earth. It did not sleep. It did not stop. It did not forgive. That city was the clash of steel against steel, the gray smoke rising from a web of chimneys, the rush of humanity pouring into the American dream from every corner of the globe. And on one late autumn afternoon, among that sea of people, a young man stepped off the pier with exactly 4 cents in his pocket, a few poems, and a sketch of a machine no one had ever seen. His name was Nikola Tesla. He carried a letter of introduction, handwritten, carefully sealed, and addressed to the most powerful man in the world of electricity at the time, Thomas Alva Edison. That letter called Tesla a genius, someone Edison should hire without delay if he did not want to miss the future. And Tesla, thin, towering, with eyes that seemed always to be listening to a melody no one else could hear, entered the city as though stepping into another world entirely. Edison was then the wizard of Menlo Park, the face of progress, of practicality, of industrial America. He was credited with bringing electric light to the world, at least according to the newspapers of the time. When Tesla walked into the office of Edison Machine Works, the great man did not realize he was facing his opposite reflection. Edison worked through trial and error. Build it, break it, try again. He believed in sweat and persistence. Tesla. He solved problems in his mind. He imagined an entire system, ran it thousands of times in his head, adjusting every gear with nothing but thought before ever touching a hammer. At first, they respected each other. but their differences in how they viewed the world could not be hidden for long. One day, Tesla made a bold proposal to redesign Edison's entire direct current DC system, not just to make it more efficient, but to completely change how humanity thought about electricity. According to some accounts, Edison promised him 50,000 United States dollars if he succeeded. Tesla did. The system was improved. But when he asked for the reward, Edison simply laughed. "You do not understand American humor." That laugh did not just dismiss Tesla's labor, it crushed his trust. Tesla did not slam the table. He did not argue. He simply walked away silently, carrying a wound in his heart, and making a decision no one expected. He would no longer cling to the shade of the powerful. He would seek the light on his own. For a time afterward, Tesla lived like a ghost drifting through Manhattan. No laboratory, no friends, no fame. He worked underground, digging trenches for electrical cables, the very systems he knew he could improve if only given the chance. His hands were stained with dirt, but in his mind, alternating current still danced. On sleepless nights, he walked through the parks, solving equations in silence, envisioning spinning machines, currents that leapt without wires, cities glowing without coal smoke. While the world called him the unlucky inventor, tricked by Edison in Tesla's mind, a revolution was quietly taking shape. You see, in every era, there are people like that. Those who are not understood, not welcomed, and sometimes not believed. But they are the ones who carry ideas the world will one day rely upon. Tesla may have had no money left in his pocket, but he never lost faith. Faith that electricity did not have to flow in just one direction. That energy, like light or life itself, was a current moving back and forth, dynamic, balanced, and beautiful. We often speak of the American dream as though it were a one-way street from poverty to wealth, from obscurity to fame. But Tesla reminded us some dreams are not meant to be measured by money, but by vision. Some lives do not follow straight lines, but oscillate just like the very current he was about to bring into the world. And it was in that rejection, in that moment of betrayal by his idol, that Tesla made a choice few dare to make, to remain loyal to his dream, not to his opportunity. Darkness still lay ahead. But within Nikola Tesla's soul, a quiet light was waiting to ignite. And when it did, the world would never be the same again. Picture an early autumn morning in Manhattan in the late 1880s. The city is still half asleep, shrouded in mist, and pigeons perch quietly on electric wires as if listening to music. Among the streets echoing with the murmurs of horse-drawn carriages and the clang of steel hammers, a tall, lanky man in a slightly worn coat steps out from a rented apartment on South Fifth Avenue. Nikola Tesla is no longer a trench digger. After years of wearing down his hands, but nurturing his dream, he has found people willing to believe and to invest in the strange designs he pulled from his mind. A small laboratory is opened. The first alternating current motor, a modest yet powerful prototype, begins to spin. It spins by magnetic fields. It spins with the equations written in his mind through countless sleepless nights. And when it runs silent without sparks, with only a steady heartbeat-like rotation, Tesla knows the future has just been born. At that very moment, another name enters the scene: George Westinghouse. He is not like Edison, not a showman of wires or light, but a businessman with vision. Westinghouse hears of Tesla and seeks him out with an offer: "I want to buy your patents." I want to bring alternating current to every home in America. It is not just a contract. It is a fateful handshake. In 1888, they sign an agreement, and from that moment on, two very different men, a capitalist and a dreamer, become allies in the electrical revolution. But no one changes the world without awakening the forces that guard the old order. Thomas Edison is not about to watch his empire of direct current crumble. He begins to strike back not with innovation, but with fear. The media is enlisted. Public demonstrations are held where animals are electrocuted to death using alternating current in front of crowds. People begin to call it the killer current. And Edison. He stands behind the invention of the electric chair, also powered by AC, as if to declare, "This is what Tesla and Westinghouse want to bring into your home." Tesla knows it is unjust, but instead of responding with words, he chooses silence. He believes in logic, in experimentation, in the quiet dignity of truth. And truth, like light, does not need to shout to be seen. In 1893, the moment arrives. The World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, a global event where millions will witness American technology usher in a new age. The lighting contract is one of the largest ever offered. Westinghouse wins it. And Tesla, with his designs, lights up the entire fairgrounds using alternating current. On opening night, more than 100,000 electric bulbs shine brilliantly throughout Jackson Park without smoke, without explosions. People gape. Some cry. Others fall to their knees. And as everything glows like daylight, Tesla stands alone in the shadows, gazing at the lights burning as brightly as his own eyes once had in that childhood storm. Not because he sought fame, but because at last someone had seen his dream. Niagara Falls, a mighty river crashing between Canada and the United States, plunging with enough force to sweep away a city. Tesla stands before the falls and whispers, "This is the heart of the world's power." When the first hydroelectric power plant is built, they're entirely using Tesla's AC technology. Buffalo becomes the first city on Earth illuminated by water. No more coal smoke, no more diesel generators. Only the sound of water and the brilliance of light. Edison, whether he accepted it or not, could no longer stop it. Tesla had won. But then something strange happened. When the light came, the one who brought it stepped back into the shadows. The spotlight shifted to investors, engineers, and businessmen. And Tesla. He returned to an old question. If I can light the land, could I do the same with the sky? In the nights that followed, he began dreaming of a wireless world where energy floated invisibly through the air, reaching every corner of the earth. A world where plugs were obsolete, where light came from the heavens, and where messages crossed oceans like whispers. While the world celebrated light bulbs and profits, Tesla once again stepped into what no one had seen, no one yet understood, and no one was ready to believe. But that is what made Nikola Tesla who he was, a man with one foot in the present, and the other always in the future. Imagine a place where endless fields stretch to the horizon, where the sky is as wide as an unpainted canvas, and the wind whispers through the pines like voices from an ancient world. This was Colorado Springs at the end of the 19th century, and in the middle of that vast land stood a solitary wooden house, its pointed roof like a needle aimed at the heavens. Inside, a man was drawing lightning with his bare hands. Nikola Tesla had left New York. After the dazzling lights of the World's Fair, after his resounding victory at Niagara Falls, he could have stayed and lived as a hero of his time. But he did not stay to reap the rewards. He left carrying with him a new dream, a dream of a world without wires. To Tesla, energy should not be confined by copper wires or physical boundaries. He believed the Earth was a giant bell where every point could transmit and receive energy. He imagined a system where ships at sea could draw power from the air, where light could reach a remote village without a single power station. A world without wires, without barriers, a world of free energy. Colorado Springs, with its open skies and empty lands, was the perfect place to attempt what no one else dared to try. There, he built the largest laboratory of his life, a massive wooden structure with a copper roof, and at its center, a colossal Tesla coil as tall as a flagpole. Each night, he powered it on, and each night, lightning split the sky. Once his artificial thunder traveled miles and burned out the town's power station. The townspeople began to whisper, "What is he doing out there? Is he calling the rain or something else?" Tesla paid no attention to the murmurs. In his journal, he wrote that he had received a signal from space, a repeating sequence he believed could not be random. Could it be from Mars? From a distant civilization trying to make contact? People called him mad. He did not answer, because he would not tell the world what he could not yet prove. He simply worked day after day among humming copper wires and artificial lightning. Was he lonely? Perhaps, but never doubtful. To Tesla, each arc of electricity across the sky was an answer from the universe, a sign that he was on the right path. In the year 1900, he returned to New York, not with a completed invention, but with a vision, a mental blueprint of a global energy transmission system. And he knew that to build it, he would need someone who could believe in what could not yet be seen. He went to J.P. Morgan. Just imagine that meeting: Tesla, gaunt, slicked-back hair, a deep, steady voice, standing before one of the most powerful financiers in the world. He did not promise profit. He promised vision. A tower that could wirelessly transmit information across the Atlantic Ocean. And one day, even energy. Invisible. Free. For all. Morgan agreed. Initial funding was released. And on a promontory along the coast of Long Island, the Wardenclyffe Tower began to rise. It stood nearly 200 feet tall, its foundations buried deep in the earth. At its peak was a gleaming copper dome, like a metallic moon. To the public, it looked like a strange antenna. To Tesla, it was a giant harp, an instrument through which he could pluck frequencies to envelop the planet. But as with all dreams, 2 Grand Wardenclyffe soon became a source of unease for investors. Morgan began to understand Tesla did not merely want to transmit signals. He wanted to transmit power. No wires, no meters, no one in control, no one collecting fees. Morgan asked coldly, "Then how do I make money from it?" Tesla had no answer, because he had never thought about money. And at that moment, the world began to shift. Another man, Guglielmo Marconi, used Tesla's very own patents to send a wireless signal across the Atlantic. The newspapers hailed Marconi as the father of radio. Tesla's name was erased from the headlines. Funding for Wardenclyffe was cut. The tower fell silent. In 1917, it was dismantled, its steel sold for the war effort. Tesla stood on the hill watching the beams being pulled down like a father watching his child be taken away. No cameras recorded it. No funeral was held for a dream. But in his mind, Wardenclyffe still lived like the light that had first sparked in his thoughts so many years before. Tesla did not cry. He did not complain. He continued to write, to sketch, to imagine, because he knew that one day the world would need the frequencies that no one could yet hear. And that night above the Long Island sky there was no lightning. But perhaps if you listen closely, you might still hear the echo of an unfulfilled dream humming through time, waiting to be awakened. New York, the 1920s. The city had changed. Electric lights now blanketed every street. Automobiles rumbled through the rain, and jazz floated through open windows from late-night radios. What was once a land of dreamers now pulsed with hurried ambition. But somewhere high atop an old hotel, there was a small room and a man who lived there as if time had stopped long ago. Nikola Tesla. There was no laboratory now, no lightning bolts tearing through the sky, no world fairs or spotlight stages. Only him scattered drawings and a mind still as brilliant as on its very first day, even if the world around him had stopped listening. Tesla now lived in seclusion, moving between low-cost hotels, often changing rooms because he could not afford the rent. He always wore a proper suit, white gloves like a European aristocrat, even when his pockets were empty. He avoided contact, never shook hands, partly due to illness, partly because the world felt too noisy to touch. He believed the number 3 held the key to the universe, and every one of his actions, his walking, his eating, even the way he opened doors, was obsessively guided by it. The hotel staff found him peculiar, but they did not know this was the man who once lit up the sky above Chicago, who had once illuminated an entire city with the power of Niagara Falls. The modern world they lived in, with electric lights, radio motors, and remote control, carried the fingerprints of this very man. And then, among all his losses, he found an unusual and beautiful friendship. Pigeons. Every day he walked to Bryant Park with seeds, crumbs, and thyme. He sat on a stone bench, hands gently trembling, murmuring softly like a father. To him, they were not just birds. They were symbols of freedom, of something more graceful than humanity, less selfish, less calculating. Among them, there was one white pigeon. It was different. It always found its way to his window, no matter how many times he changed hotels. He said it found me like light finds the darkness. He said he loved it as he would love a human being. Perhaps in that small bird, Tesla saw a reflection of himself, solitary, flying through a world that never quite understood him, yet always returning to a silent, enduring faith. As the white pigeon grew weak, Tesla cared for it like family. And one night, as it drew its final breath in his hands, Tesla said, he saw a light emanate from its eyes, a radiant beam, as if the universe had just closed a door. That was when I knew he wrote everything I needed to do in life was done. From time to time, the press still came looking for him, mostly in search of bizarre claims, death rays that could shoot down planes, contact with Mars, instantaneous energy across oceans. They called him the Mad Old Man. They laughed. And then they left with a few sensational headlines, but never with the truth. The truth was, Tesla was not mad. He simply lived in a future humanity had not yet arrived at. His room had nothing but a bed, an old wooden desk, a small lamp, and piles of paper drawings, formulas, handwritten thoughts in sharp, elegant script. Within those pages lay fragments of his heart, not for the world of his time, but for generations yet to come. Then, on a winter morning, January 7th, 1943, the maid knocked and knocked, but no one answered. Inside, Nikola Tesla lay still on the bed, eyes closed, as if he had fallen asleep in his final dream. He died with no family by his side, no grand funeral, no condolences from government or academy. He departed the world exactly as he had lived, in silence, with depth, and with unwavering dignity. That small room number 3327 at the New Yorker Hotel has since become a quiet point of light in history. Not because it was grand, but because within it, a man spent his life imagining a world that we now live in. And do you know something? Perhaps he died alone, but his ideas of clean energy, wireless communication, green technology, and a mind centuries ahead of its time now live on in every device, every light, every invisible signal we take for granted. Nikola Tesla is gone. But if you listen closely, in the sounds of the city, in the frequencies of the radio, or in the gentle rhythm of a street lamp's glow, you might hear him still whispering, "The future belongs to the dreamers, and I have left you the light to find your way." If you have followed this story all the way to now, then perhaps you too are feeling something quiet within your heart. Not the sound of applause, not the burst of fireworks, but a different sound, small, subtle, and real, like the faint hum in the air after a flash of lightning. A sound only those who listen with their whole hearts can truly hear. That was the sound Nikola Tesla spent his entire life chasing. When Tesla closed his eyes for the last time in room 3327 of the New Yorker Hotel, the world did not pause. Cars kept moving, lights kept shining, radios kept playing music. There was no special bulletin, no crowd to bid farewell, only an old man passing silently among unfinished designs and dreams left incomplete. By the very next morning, government agents arrived. They wasted no time. The documents in his room were sealed and taken away. What was inside them? Energy weapons, a global transmission system, some secret beyond the reach of present knowledge. No one said. Perhaps they did not understand either. And perhaps it was not yet time. And yet in Tesla's death, something extraordinary began to take root. Just months later, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that it was Tesla, not Marconi, who had truly invented radio. It was a quiet verdict, absent from the front pages. But for those who understood, it was a restoration of honor for a soul long forgotten by history. From that moment, people began to seek him out again. Young engineers dug through his old drawings. Novelists penned stories of futuristic worlds inspired by his visions. Scientists found his name resurfacing in each new technological leap. And so slowly, the name Nikola Tesla returned not as a historical figure, but as a living symbol of pure invention, boundless vision, and unwavering faith in the future. You see, Tesla did not live to become rich. He could have been a millionaire many times over, but he refused. He never sought to own energy, he wanted to share it. He did not believe that light should be measured in bills. He believed knowledge was a form of light, and once born, it must be allowed to travel freely. He once said, "I do not care that they stole my money. They can have my machines. But the ideas are for the world." And perhaps that is the greatest lesson. In an age where we measure value by profit, define success through likes and leaderboards, Tesla reminds us that there are things that cannot be counted. A dream, a principle, a gaze fixed on what has not yet formed, but already echoes in the hearts of those who dare to feel. In this era of smartphones, Wi-Fi, electric cars, satellites, and robots, all things Tesla once dreamed of, we now live in what was once his imagination. But sometimes, we forget the most important part. These technologies did not appear from nowhere. They came from a person, a heart, a soul that endured loneliness and loss to see farther than the rest of us. So if you are somewhere, perhaps in your kitchen late at night, or in the back seat of a car gliding through the city, or lying in bed staring at the ceiling in the dark, and you feel like you are the only one who believes in something the world does not yet understand, remember Tesla. Remember that there once was a man who walked through snow guided only by the light in his mind, who held a white pigeon and saw the universe in its eyes, who lived poor alone but never without hope. Let him remind you that sometimes those who are ahead of their time do not need to be understood. They only need to be heard at the right moment. Because sometimes, amid the noise of life, what we need is not another word, but a pause. A space where we hear ourselves, where we hear dreams not yet realized gently humming like an invisible wave of energy still flowing across the world. Ever since that first night, Tesla looked up to the sky and asked, "If energy is everywhere, why not share it with everyone?" To this day, no one has answered that question, but perhaps we still have time, and the light is still waiting.